And it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. Heather, today, what are we going to talk about? Is anything coming up?
Nah, nothing much, per usual. So let's talk about the state of the race and Trump seemingly gaining ground.
Yes.
Don't like it. Closing arguments that are coming up, and then how we can have hope and what our coping mechanisms are for the final 9 days.
Well, I can't wait to get to the
Let's skip the beginning.
The last topic. But the state of the race is tightening. In fact, yesterday, Times Siena, which is about the best poll there is, but polls are fallible, and let's just not give them too much credit. But it did say that the race was tied, 48 to 48%. But what really got my attention, it was the tide in the popular vote.
Yes.
Heather. The popular vote. I mean, even in the last election and the election before that, we've seen Democrats take at least 6 or 7 million above the Republicans. In 2016, the Democrats 3 million above Trump. Should we be concerned about the popular vote being tied?
I mean, of course, we need to be concerned about all of it. But, so what does this mean? This means in California, in New York, in places with so many people, we are seeing more people claiming they're going to vote for Trump than we thought, than previously did?
Yes. I mean, that's what certainly it seems. How Trump can be gaining ground when you have so much. I mean, not only does Kamala Harris have the right answers, and not only is she the more attractive, in the best sense of the term, candidate, and she is not a fascist, and she believes in democracy, and she has much more money to spend on ads, and she is a better person. But how can this be happening? What's your theory?
Well, you've been talking about it for a long time, but can we just talk about, let's remember swing states are so important. So yes, we're seeing this shift in terms of the popular vote, but what matters, for better or for worse, is the Electoral College, right? So the swing state polls are still looking okay, right?
Well, they're looking okay, but they are also tightening.
Yeah.
Every single one of them.
But do you remember when it was Obama and Romney back in 2012? I mean, it was incredibly close. I remember the New York Times saying neck and neck, and he was up. They were virtually tied.
By the end of October.
By the end of October, and he won by almost 4 points. So not that everything follows the last poll that you would like the reality to follow, but we cannot be fixated on the polls more than we're already fixated on the polls.
No, absolutely right. We've already spent too much time talking about the polls.
But let's keep talking about him.
Because,
but so why is he winning? I mean, we know
well,
this.
We don't know that he's winning.
No, but he's gaining. Why is he winning
gaining
more people?
That's right. And I think,
instead of losing them.
I think the issue is it's not until the last weeks of a presidential election that people start focusing. Putting to one side early mail-in votes, they've already been mailed in, but most voters really do take it seriously only the last couple of weeks. And so the question is, why is Trump gaining in the last couple of weeks when people are paying attention? I would have assumed just the opposite. But it may be that Trump is the devil and people still don't know Kamala Harris. It may be that there is racism and sexism.
There's no maybe about that.
And there clearly is. And it also may be that her issue, we think democracy is terribly important. I think democracy, you think democracy, but it may be that most Americans think the economy is more important. And on the economy, it's easy to demagogue. It's easy to say, well, the Trump economy was better. Most people had were better off. Now you have food prices and medical prices and medical costs and energy prices much higher. And unless Kamala Harris really does, in the final closing arguments, talk about that, what she's going to do for average working people, how she's going to make their lives better, democracy doesn't matter to a lot of people.
Right. I also think there's optimism bias. I mean, you see all these polls. I heard this term this week, poll washing. So we've seen brainwashing, old news. Then we've talked about sane washing, where the media just goes in and says, oh, Trump did this thing this week. And it's treated as somewhat sane, just the usual. But when we talk about poll washing, I mean, for example, Many Latinos are voting yes to Trump and yes to mass deportation. But then when you dig deeper, it's like, what does mass deportation actually mean? Is Trump actually talking about the people from the beginning of time? Is he talking about people who crossed illegally in the last 3 minutes? I mean, there's this sense that polls are so obviously simplistic. And so it's hard to get into people, hard to see what they're actually thinking. And I do think there's this optimism bias where it's like, I am so uncertain. I have such existential angst. I have such economic questions. I'm not feeling that I'm being of use and I'm bringing home what I need to bring home. And maybe he can save me. I mean, I think there's a kind of this optimism bias of, I mean, it'll happen to everyone else, but not me.
Well, there is, I don't think there's any question that that's there. And the first cousin to that optimism bias is the assumption that, well, how bad could Trump be? I mean, I talk to a lot of people that say, I hate him. I think he's a miserable human being. And then they will say to me, but I'm thinking about voting for him. Well, how can you vote for a miserable human being? Well, he's already been president. He couldn't be that bad.
Right.
And we got through, and he's tough.
Right.
He's strong and he's tough. And I think that illusion, this is part of a different kind of optimism bias, but the illusion that Trump, simply because he is such a lout, such a kind of thug, could get things done in a system that just otherwise seems so complicated and so difficult to get anything done in, is an easy sell for people.
But I think he's succeeding in framing this election in a male framing. Obviously. I mean, duh, Heather. But I think we're also kind of going along with it, and the mainstream media is. Women are going to show up. What happened in 2022, none of the polls picked up. There was an under-reporting, there was an under-polling, there was an underestimation of how mad women were and how demanding they would be about both democracy and their uteri.
Their uteri?
Well, uteruses, as many would say.
Well, I think this is going to be a uterus election.
It really, I think the polls are under-reporting that as well. And we cannot forget about it. And it's important and it's significant.
If you look at the gender gap is larger in this election. It doesn't matter what poll you look at. Every poll shows the same thing. Gender bias is huge. The gender gap is huge. And as you get to younger people, the gender gap is even larger. Young women overwhelmingly favor Kamala Harris. Young men overwhelmingly favor Trump. And the bros,
I know the bros.
The bro, do you have any bros? Mm-hmm. I mean, the Elon Musk types are really out there. And he is turning them out. He's helping turn them out. He's the October surprise. He's Trump's October surprise.
Yeah, but he is not a political genius. Now, he is rich as can be, but he's not some, person who sits in a back room and gets all the best strategists and you think, wow, the way he is thinking about this, the way he knows what he's doing when he's jumping on that stage. Heather, I mean, that's not what's happening.
Money trumps, excuse the expression, everything else. I mean, he is the richest person on the planet. He is putting huge amounts of money into these battleground states.
Well, think about how much money he has coming from the government in his government contracts, which, by the way, are under investigation. There are a number of companies, 20 investigations related to the environment and safety and discrimination.
Well, when Trump makes him, as they seem to be agreed upon, if Trump wins, some sort of a major player in the economy, in economic policy, there will be conflicts of interest galore. Yeah. I mean, how can he possibly make any decisions that are not going to affect SpaceX or the satellites or any of the others? But he, right now, in the states that are the most critical battleground states, he's putting out $1 million a day in each of them in a raffle that is only available to people who have registered.
I know. Now, he's already paid out $1 million. There
are laws against paying people even to register. You cannot do this in the United States. It violates election law. He's also apparently talking to Trump 3 or 4 times a week. Independent expenditures.
Trump and Putin.
And Putin too. Well, let's get to that. But independent expenditures, that are in super PACs, the reason the Supreme Court justified super PACs as independent expenditures
Well, they're completely separate.
is the notion that the head of super PACs don't talk to the candidates. There's no communication.
I know.
So you have a second area of a legal violation. If Trump gets in, obviously he thinks that he's off the hook.
I know. And then we mentioned this last week, but the cover of The Economist where it says we're the envy of the world. And the economy is doing well for many people, but where is so much of the gains are going? It's not into people's wallets and rinky-dink checking accounts.
It's going into the stock market. Heather, this economy, I think the reason there is so much deep anger about the economy, it's not just the working class. It's a lot of the middle class. There is so many people. Nobody has job security any longer.
Yes.
Job security is a thing of the past. Everybody is in the so-called precariat, which means that if they lose a job, they're shafted. I mean, they and their family, they don't have health insurance. If they lose a job, they don't know where their income is going to come from.
Yeah.
If they're in danger of losing a job, if their company is taken over by another company, and the purpose of these mergers usually is to consolidate and reduce payroll costs, which means reduce overhead, which means reduce the number of people who are working for you. So this, I think there is a deep anger and frustration with the economic system. And if I were going to make any recommendation at all to Harris in terms of closing arguments,
Yes.
it would be talk about the economy and mention that that big corporations, not small corporations, big corporations are shafting Americans. Big corporations are responsible for food prices being huge and medical costs being high and energy costs being high. Take it on and
Right.
show whose side you're on.
Right. And Trump addresses this a lot, but he doesn't start his sentence with the subject of big corporations.
He doesn't start his sentences with anything.
Well, it's just one sentence. But really, I mean, I think the way he does it is you can't afford eggs, it's because of them, right?
Yeah.
And what she needs to say is, I'll tell you the reason you can't afford eggs. It's big corporations. I'm going to do something about it.
Exactly.
Right.
If you don't give an answer to the question of why am I struggling,
Yep.
then you are thought to be you're on another planet.
Right.
Now, when Trump says it's because of them, the them is immigrants, or it's the deep state, or it's the coastal elites, or it's some other...
And the Democrats.
Or the Democrats, or liberals, or
Yep.
communists, or whatever he
Yep.
wants to go, Marxists. But, and that's obviously crazy. But if you have no other alternative as a voter, and you are in the working class or lower middle class or even middle
Right.
class, you are going to hear somebody who comes up with some sort of answer to that economic question.
Right. So you have more Republicans coming out this week in favor of Harris. And I see this and I feel positive. I think, whew, look at that,
Well,
country before party. So this week we had Charlie Dent out of Pennsylvania. That was surprising. But then Senator Robert Cowles, Republican out of Green Bay, he said former President Trump, he said it on a radio show, but it was picked up all over the place, is the totalitarian. He said, I'm voting for Harris. Charlie Dent said, I already voted for Harris. What is all this? Does this give you hope, or what do you think about it?
Well, if you're running a traditional campaign and you want to appeal to, as Democrats have for years, the swing vote, suburban, particularly Republican women this time around. That's what they all want. That's what the Democrats want. We can get the swing vote, the Republican women. Yes, you want to show that Dick Cheney, for example, is for you, and all these other Republicans are for you. But the danger, and I want to repeat this, but in a slightly different way, the big danger is if anti-establishment, anti-elite populism is the biggest force in American politics, the danger you run is if you have Dick Cheney and all these Republicans, and you have, every entertainer, Beyonce and
Taylor Swift. and actors, Eva Longoria. I mean, my feed is just.
But if you
blowing
have
up.
everybody who is anybody, doesn't it look like you're the establishment candidate? That's the danger. It looks like you represent everybody who has a big name and a big following and a big corporation behind them. And who is the anti-establishment candidate? It's the person who is, like
Pissing
Donald Trump,
everyone off.
getting everybody outraged, saying things that nobody should be saying.
Right.
And maybe even if you have Elon Musk, who is the renegade or poses as a renegade, maybe then you can even burnish your anti-establishment credentials.
But what are people supposed to not say anything? Because they don't want everyone to know that they're supporting her, because then she might seem like she's establishment. I mean, what else are we supposed to do?
No, but this goes back to the closing argument. If she were to take on the big forces in the American economy that are shafting people, and let's be clear, the top richest 1% has just about 50% of all of the shares of stock owned by Americans. The richest 10% of Americans have 92% of all the shares of stock
astounding.
owned by Americans.
You can't say this enough. I know.
But this is the reality. And as you've had increasingly over the last few years, more and more share buybacks, all the profits are going into the stock market. The stock market is doing wonderfully well. But if the stock market does wonderfully well, it doesn't have any impact on most Americans.
Right. I know I'm Johnny One Note here, but I'm trying to remain optimistic. Johnita One Note.
I'm nauseously optimistic.
I
Heather.
know you are, but so can't all these people coming out? I feel like these Republicans, in Green Bay, isn't he giving permission to other people to say, okay, I was thinking that, and now that this person who I've respected, he's been in office for 37 years, if he's willing to vote for Harris, and that was my instinct, but I was scared to, I'm willing to too.
Well, that might be the case, but if you and I are sitting here and it's 9 days before the election and every poll is showing a trend toward Trump, then your hypothesis is not working. My hypothesis, sadly, that it looks more like the establishment is behind her, even the Republican establishment, and I don't like the establishment.
I know,
that might be actually what's behind all
But
this.
your hypothesis and the poll's hypotheses are not always correct.
That's
And I
right.
think there are other things at play.
Heather, there are many, many other things at play.
I
but,
do.
But, let me just say one more thing about democracy and fascism, because we have, this past week, evidence, even more evidence, that the people who worked for Trump think he
Oh, yeah.
is a dictator, a
Yep.
fascist,
Pick your term. Totalitarian.
and that he is anti-democracy, and he's
Yep.
part of the anti-democracy movement. The generals,
Yeah.
this is a big, big
Right.
deal.
Well, we have a clip. And also, just yesterday, 13 former Trump staffers came out supporting retired Marine General John Kelly, who also was a Secretary of Homeland Security, coming out, and I think we have the clip, of saying, we cannot trust Donald Trump. He is a fascist.
And by the way, Kelly was the longest running chief of staff of Trump.
Right.
And so he knows what he
knows it
speaks
all.
about.
Let's watch.
What do you think? Do you think he's a fascist?
Well, I'm looking at the definition of fascism. It's a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
Now, that is the person who worked more closely with Trump than almost anybody else and is a former general. And you have General Mark Milley, who also says that Trump is
And
a
these people
fascist.
were in charge of Homeland Security, the top of the top.
What more evidence do we not? What do we need? I think, again, we get back to the paradox. A lot of Americans say, well, I don't like him. He may be anti-democratic, small d. He may be a fascist. But at least he's effective. At least, like Mussolini, he can make the trains run on time.
Right.
people say, this democracy, it's who needs it? It's corrupt. It's big businesses and rich people putting all this money into these campaigns. It doesn't represent me. I don't have a say.
Right.
What am I going to lose? That's what I'm afraid of. That's the mentality I fear.
And I think they really distance themselves. They think it's just a little bubble on a piece of paper. And so who else do I have? I mean, the woman, this person who's, lefty and going to take, whatever they think she's going to do. And so I think they've really detached and they've said, no, I don't like this guy. Of course I don't. If I say I don't like him while I'm bubbling it,
right.
Does it count?
And they also say, well, we survived 4 years of him, and he did pretty well with the economy, and that's all that's going on. Now, hopefully, again, our hypothesis, you're coming over to my side.
No, I'm not.
And I
I'm
wish you
way
wouldn't.
over here.
Please don't do that.
Way
I'm
over
counting
here.
on you to be optimistic. The only reason I can express my fears is because you were so optimistic.
Oh, good. Well, thanks. Great. Sorry about that, everybody. The other thing, too, is that I think there's a miss in terms of how bad Putin is. And this is, I'm sure, in terms of our civics and our history. And I think people, and young people have a sense that Putin is a bad guy. But I don't think there's this visceral, obviously there's not, remembering of what Russia has done to the world, to us in particular. I don't know how you kind of bring that back. I don't think when people hear he's talking to Putin all the time, it actually sinks in.
Elon Musk?
Both Musk and Trump.
Or Trump. Well, I think that Putin is the world's dictator. I mean, he's assassinating his political opponents. Navalny's memoir just came out.
Yep.
He threatens NATO, threatens the rest of Europe. But if you are somebody who says, look, I don't care. I really don't care about Russia. I don't care what Putin is going to do. We're not going to have a nuclear war. In fact, let's try to just keep the peace and have prosperity at home and bring the jobs back. That's the kind of mentality that we are dealing with.
But those are lies.
They are not only lies, but they are extremely dangerous kinds of, you use the term optimism bias. It's an extremely dangerous kind of assumption that we don't need to worry about foreign policy. Look what is happening in Ukraine. I mean, if we needed any evidence of Putin's bad intentions, look at the war he actually started in Ukraine.
And I'm still heartened by what I'm seeing is being reported about what's happening on TikTok and online and the spending that the Dems and associated PACs are doing online and the success they're having. But Trump had some wins this past week, and I do wonder how that correlates with all the testing. I don't know when the polls are, when they do their surveying and how it relates to what's happening on the internet. But Trump's McDonald's stunt that so many of us saw as a stunt and ridiculous, and the apron, and it was closed down and they were actors, but the clips did incredibly well on TikTok. I mean, his team knows what they're doing in terms of a lot of messaging and keeping him at the top of people's feeds. And so that is what the Harris campaign and related parties are up against, and having to break into the algorithms and break through. Now, they've done it incredibly well, but this is unbelievable. This is incredibly hard.
And it's very hard because if he sucks all the oxygen out of the air in terms of people's capacity to think about anything beyond the immediate, then she doesn't have a chance to even explain what she wants to do or who she is.
Right.
And because she's the newcomer, because she's only had 3 months,
Yep.
She is not the incumbent in terms of the president. It becomes much, much more difficult for her. He is the devil you know. She is somebody you don't know. People take the devil they know.
But I think that's ridiculous. Also, we do know her. She's
Well-
been vice president for 4 years.
Well, but
But if it were like some other white guy vice president, everyone would be like, well, I know him. He's just been over there at the podium and kind of walking around. I saw him get off a plane and he shook somebody's hand.
Well, that's,
We would not be like, I have no idea who this person is.
this goes
Where?
obviously. Are we? Heather, the misogyny and racism are big, and they are front and center. Obviously.
Well, I am still hopeful that the ladies are going to save us. I really am.
Well,
I
if
mean, a
anybody
lot
s-
of people are going to save us,
If
but
anybody
I do think
saves us, it's going to be the ladies.
Well, I think we have in the past underestimated how important reproductive freedom is, and I think Beyonce last night. Why did they choose Texas? Not only is she from there, but it is ground zero in terms of outlawing abortion. I mean, it is not okay. I think that was a strategic choice, obviously, and she was phenomenal, and they were phenomenal, and I'm hopeful that that will cause upticks on online and in polls.
Heather, I love your optimism. I love it.
Are we gonna have to arm wrestle?
And no,
Like this
I
is-
want to believe you. I want
You
to.
have to believe me.
I do believe you. But,
and-
I'm look, you have to understand where I'm coming from. I have been
course.
fighting these battles
I know.
for before you were born.
I know.
And to see America, 48% of Americans willing to support or supposedly willing to support this monster, and he is a monster. It gives me such heartache.
I know it does. I know it does. Well, I think everyone has to get out and vote and tell 3 people to vote, and we'll get to that. So the closing arguments are coming. So we have tomorrow night, Madison Square Garden, a Nazi revisit. I don't
Well,
know
it
what
is sort
we
of a
call
Nazi
it.
revisit because in 1939, the Nazi Party had a Madison Square Garden big to do.
Shindig.
And the shindig and the big sign was America First.
And so Trump will be at Madison Square Garden tomorrow saying all the same tedium, and we're all going to say, I can't believe he said it again, and I can't believe he was even more crass, and I can't believe, and he will be.
Yes, and that I can't believe is exactly what's fueling the anti-establishment glee in terms of Trump's. And then we have on Tuesday, we have Kamala Harris on the Ellipse, the same place where Trump had his rally
Yeah.
on
It's very establishment.
January 6th, 2021, when he says to people, you know, you've got to save the country and do what you can. And he knew that there were weapons in the crowd, and he
Yep.
ordered them or suggested strongly that they go up to the Capitol and do what they did. And
And
he
more
still,
than Martin Luther King.
and
I
he
Had a
still
Dream
has
speech.
not been held accountable for any of
I
this.
know. I know it. But I'm hopeful. So her speech, so you implied this earlier, but so she'll talk about January 6th and democracy. We know she will, and she's in the heart of D.C. where it all happened. And so she'll make that stark contradiction, blah, blah, blah. What else? You want her to come after corporations.
I wanted to say something about the extraordinary maldistribution of wealth and income in this country because so much corporate money and wealthy private money has corrupted the system in terms of the rules of the game. I mean, I could write it for her. I could.
I think you should. In fact, she could just play some of our videos.
And but it's very hard. She, like most Democrats, she is dependent on that money, corporate money and wealthy money. And Mark Cuban is a good example. Cuban.
Yeah, Mark Cuban, yeah. But a lot of other people have been quiet. I mean, we have Musk shouting. We have Cuban saying a lot, and a lot of it is going viral online, so that's great.
But
even though-
Jamie Dimon, let me give you the example. Jamie Dimon,
you
head of
have to?
J.P. Morgan Chase,
Yeah.
who has been a lifelong Democrat and who, on almost every issue, he is out there talking about his opinion about public policy. He is never shy in terms of giving his opinion. But when it comes to this race, his silence is deafening.
I know.
Now, Heather, what is leadership in America if not standing up to the bully of bullies, Donald Trump?
I know.
And Jamie Dimon is telling associates at J.P. Morgan Chase, well, the reason he doesn't want to come out against Trump is because he's afraid that Trump is going to wreak vengeance on J.P. Morgan Chase and on Dimon. Well, what more reason do you need to come out against him than he is making it clear that he is going to hold people accountable? Trump is going to wreak vengeance.
Yep.
on his political opponents.
I know. And you saw, I mean, we've heard nothing. The LA Times, right? And the Washington Post.
Both of them run by billionaires, in terms of owned by billionaires. They're not run by, but owned by billionaires.
Yeah.
And neither editorial board is not as being permitted to come out with an endorsement of
Yeah.
either Trump or Harris.
Yeah. The LA Times is Patrick Soon-Chung, and then there's Jeff Bezos on the Washington Post side.
And these billionaires are saying, don't say anything.
Yep.
I want to just make a general point here, Heather, because we've kind of gone around this. Because if you look at Elon Musk and you look at Jeff Bezos and you look at the power of these billionaires in terms of our economy and our society and our politics, if you are not angry about the interaction and interlocking of power and wealth, then you're not seeing what's going on.
Yeah.
As I've said before, and I'll say it again, Brandeis was right. When Brandeis, the great jurist, said, we have a choice. We can either have great wealth in the hands of a few people, or we can have a democracy, but we can't have both.
I know.
He was speaking in the 1920s, but this is what we are facing right now in the 2020s.
I know. So much money in politics. It's all intertwined. Musk is such a fascinating example. Do you think Brandeis pictured Musk in his head?
I'm sure he did.
Okay, so coping.
Coping.
I think I'm going to give up social media for the next 9 days. Find me after that.
Well, that's one way of coping. I mean, the question for you and for us is how to get through the next 9 days sane, with
Really, truly.
and sleep well. And how do you actually manage the next 9 days? You're going to get off social media? Are you really?
No, but I'll do less. I'll try and be strategic about it. Also, I like reading my Substacks, yours included. But I try to not just see what the algorithms are going to serve up. I try and read interesting things that I've chosen to have sent to me. And look, now there's a bias there too, obviously. But that'll be one thing. Try to not have MSNBC on all the time.
Well, also close friends. Surround yourself.
Or just don't care about politics.
well-
Find those people.
Either
Play
they care about
mahjong. More mahjong.
Either they care about politics or they really are positive, like you are. You are a close
Yeah,
friend.
except you're
and
like,
you-
you should not be so positive, Heather.
No, I want you to be positive. It makes me feel good.
Great, I'll just
And
lie to
family.
you.
I mean, if you have family, by the way, most of us, or many of us, have some family in the other camp,
Really?
in the Trump camp.
I'm looking at you, family. I know.
And stay away from them for the next 9 days. But surround yourself with people who are supportive and good and upbeat. Play games. Try to get a
Also,
lot.
walks. I mean, for anyone who can do physically active things, whatever the range is for you.
Or meditation.
Meditation. I'm not great at meditation.
I'm not either.
I can't imagine. Should
I
we try
try-
and meditate together?
We should
You
try
go
that.
first. We should do
No,
a plot.
you can't do. You have to do it. You just do it. You don't wait for the other person to
Say it
start.
again. I was meditating. I didn't even hear you.
Well, what else can we
also
advise?
vote. All we can really do is get our friends to vote. Text 3 people.
And
say it to people.
And after you vote, if you're going on actually November 5th, then text people that you're coming out of the voting polling place and get them
3
to vote.
people. Vote tripling. Yep. Do it.
I think that's very important.
So we have one more Klatch before the election. I think we should bring Michael Lahanas Calderon back.
I think so too.
What does everyone think?
I think so
Okay,
too.
I think it should be the three of us.
We'll be the 3 of us, and we'll do kind of a deep dive.
The last. So this is not the last. This is the.
This is the penultimate.
Do you know that for a long time I thought penultimate meant ultimate?
No, there's the penultimate.
I
which
know
is,
now.
Which
has a
now.
pen
and
in
then
it.
the ultimate.
The penultimate.
The penultimate is different. Is close to the ultimate.
It's the almost
but
ultimate.
Then next week will be the ultimate.
Yeah.
The
I'm
ultimate
sure,
ultimate.
Yeah. I think it's Latin, the pen part,
The pen.
for almost or something, but it's not pen. I'm sure it's been moved over time because pen.
Yeah.
Doesn't
no.
make sense.
The pandemic. No, that was
Oh,
Pan.
that's different.
Pen.
Penultimate. So this is our penultimate. We will have a final Klatch. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see the closing arguments and to cover that and all the shenanigans next week.
I am too, and I just want to have a final word with all of you, because I know how nerve-wracking this is. I know how worrying it is. I know if you're anybody like me, I went to my doctor for a physical checkup last week, and my blood pressure is very high.
Be safe.
Well, I want you to all be safe, and you be safe too, and sleep if you possibly can. Just get good night's sleep, and I think it's going to work out. Right?
I mean, yes, of course it is. We'll be here.
We'll be here.
No matter what.
No matter what, we're here for you. So have a good week, everybody. We will see you next Saturday.